1370 AM, 96.3 FM, The Source.
You know, this music normally works, but when we're going to talk about traveling, I think I'd rather have like the Holly. What's that song by Steve? What's the guy's name from Fleetwood Mac that did the Holiday Road song?
Oh, that's Lindsey Buckingham.
Lindsey Buckingham, yeah. We should have that song. Andy Steves is on the phone. He is a podcaster, a coffee snob. Is that right?
Yes.
An amateur cyclist, an entrepreneur, an award-winning author. And the book we're focusing on, if you're looking at the podcast of ours, you'll see the cover of the book. It's called Andy Steves Europe, City Hopping on a Budget. I am all ears with this subject because it is on my bucket list to do Europe. I've never done it, you know.
Me neither.
Although I go to Orlando all the time, and I pretend I'm a tourist.
Yeah.
Andy, good morning. How are you?
Good morning, Larry. Good morning, Robin. Thanks so much for having me. I'm doing great.
Is your dad Rick?
My dad is Rick. Grew up traveling with him to Europe every year of my life.
Oh my gosh! Oh, so everybody does that to you, right? You got to. What do they say about somebody's doing something their father did? You come by that honestly. What does that even mean?
I get any number of reactions. It's either like, wait, is that any relation to the other Steve? And you'll also write guidebooks? What a coincidence, you know? And then there's others like, oh my gosh. But no, it's been a fun project putting this together.
So what is? I mean, have you done a lot of this? Have you ever you look like a young guy that hitchhiking around Europe would be something you would do more than your dad would do. Have you ever done the hitchhiking thing?
I have done what's called ride sharing. So that's just like, you know, on Airbnb, people rent out their spare bedrooms or apartments. There's ride sharing sites where you can say, hey, I'm going from Munich to Berlin. Is anybody driving that way that I can jump in and pay for gas money? So I've done that, but hitchhiking isn't so much a thing over in Europe these days. I like to travel around with budget flights. You can travel for fast and cheap with budget flights and zip around the continent, and that's exactly what this book is designed for, is to help people maximize their time over in Europe and save some money while doing it. Now,
remember, you're dealing with somebody who's never ever been to Europe, so my questions may sound...
We got to get you over there, Larry.
I know, so my questions are going to sound very naive or whatever, but is it going from country to country similar as to, in this country, going state to state, or is it completely different than that?
That's a really good analogy, I would say, because of the EU. So once you enter in to keep it simple, generally Western Europe, you just get your passport stamped once. You could fly into Rome, you could visit Austria, Germany, France, Spain, Ireland, and then only get a stamp as you leave. So it's really well integrated, and everybody is on the same currency over there too. So it's easier to travel than ever before.
Okay. What about the language differences? Is that hard to deal with, or what?
These days, not so much, because technology has really blasted American Hollywood culture over to Europe, so everybody's really in tune with what's happening in the States, of course. There's great apps like Google Translate. It's incredible. You can speak into your phone, and it'll visually translate in big, bold, high-contrast letters for anybody you need to communicate with. You can even use your phone's camera to visually translate a menu or other information, and it changes the letters on your screen, if you can imagine. So we're living in a pretty good time to get over to Europe.
Are people traveling more and more by themselves these days, or do they still travel in groups?
Good question. People travel in all sorts of different, groups. So you can have the classic couple traveling around. You can have groups of friends. Europe is very safe and easy to get around for solo travelers. And depending on who you are traveling with, there'd be different recommendations I would make. If you're traveling solo, for example, I would say social hostels are a great way to make friends along the way. You can pass information back and forth. You can share ideas on what to see, and you can make friends and go see sights and go out for nightlife in these amazing cities. Whereas if you're traveling with a group of friends, maybe you want to look at big Airbnb apartments and split the cost among yourselves, and that can be a great way to save money as well. So, it's
really?
whatever's right for each person is what I would recommend.
Where's home for you? Where are you right now? Maybe is a better question.
Right now, believe it or not, I'm in Edmonds, Washington. That's about 20 minutes north of Seattle, at my mom's house.
Okay, so that's...
I've been...
Mother's Day.
Yeah, I've been on the road since January. Exactly. I took her for salsa dancing lessons yesterday.
How wonderful.
Yeah, we got a kick out of that.
So, okay, again, my naivete is going to show... I don't know the difference between a hostel and an Airbnb. What the heck is a hostel even?
Sure. So, okay, we got hotels, we have hostels, and we have Airbnb. Hostels are just a accommodation where you share a room with between, you might have 4 beds, 6 beds, 12 beds.
What?
Even up to 36 beds, if you can imagine.
With people you don't know? People you don't know?
With people you don't know. Exactly. However, I don't recommend those hostels where you're sleeping with 36 other people. But in a room like with 6, 8, or 10 dorm beds, you can sleep just fine. The pictures of the hostels that my dad used to stay in that I've seen look more like jail cells oftentimes.
My gosh.
But hostels have come so far. You have your own reading lights, you have a charging station, your own locker, en-suite showers, so you don't need to leave your room to hop in the shower.
All right.
And so hostels are just a good way to travel for cheap.
All right. So advise me on this. I'm 63 years old. Do I fit in? Isn't it mostly college kids?
In years past, it really was geared towards young travelers, but these days it's budget travelers of any age. And again, what I would say is get on websites like hostelworld.com, and you can look at all the reviews, you can look at the photos, you can read between the lines a little bit to get a sense, is this a hostel where I'm going to sleep? Is this a hostel where I'm going to party? Is this a hostel that really focuses on activities? So you can find the right match no matter what your background is, experience, or age.
But see, here's the thing for me. Even if I have the money, I think I'd like to have this experience. I feel like I missed out on something when I was younger, and I'd like to do that. So is that weird? I mean, what do you think?
No, like honestly, you have backpackers of all ages in hostels, and I would definitely recommend it. Again, you can go for a smaller dorm, and the good thing that hostels have these days, they've converted some of their dorm rooms into private rooms. So I often do that because I'm traveling with my computer, my cash, my documents. I don't want to sacrifice the social aspect of a hostel, but I really appreciate my own privacy, my own kind of refuge at the end of the day. So finding a private room in a hostel gives you the best of both worlds. Maybe you want to try that for the first time.
What is the length of time that would be a good duration for the traveler?
So, especially, these days, the whole first part of my book, the whole introduction is talking about how to find those cheap transatlantic flights. What I would recommend is just set up flight alerts and see what comes your way. If you're able to be a little bit flexible with work, I wouldn't say I'm going over for 10 days or 14 days or 3 weeks without looking first at flights, because you never know. Maybe there's a ridiculously cheap Seattle to Dublin flight that pops open, and I can just go to Ireland for 5 days for $400 or something. That might be for the certain people, that might be the best way to do it. I have written my guidebook just understanding that Americans don't have that much vacation time. So I understand that most people, if they visit Rome or Paris or London for the first time, they're going to spend about 3 days. So I recommend a 3-day itinerary that provides kind of the foundation of each chapter.
All right, I'm going to tell you one of my bucket list items. I want to visit a town called Velbert, Germany, because that's where my mom was born. It doesn't seem like it's a popular town. It seems like it's not on anybody's radar. Is it just as easy to stay in the small towns that nobody's ever heard of as it is like the well-known towns?
Yes, and that's so special when you can trace your family's history to an actual town or area in Poland or Germany. For my family, my mom just got into our ancestry, and I was able to track down the famine church where our 4 times great-grandparents were married in 1824, about a day's carriage ride outside of Cork in the southwest of Ireland. What I mean by famine church is that all the wooden parts of the church are long gone. And so you see the kind of the stone bookends of an old church that is completely covered over in ivy. You got a handful of tombstones, but that's about it. And that's just like in a tiny town called Ballyporeen, outside of Cork in Ireland. So it's so special when you get a chance to go experience those. It is easy to travel to them too via bus or train, and then if you got to kind of get that, they say the last mile, or have that flexibility to really explore, maybe you want to consider renting a car for a few days. But I would advise against renting a car for your whole trip. It's just, you don't need it, except if you're trying to get into those back roads or maybe an obscure town like the one you mentioned.
So should you go ahead and do your whole vacation, like look at the sites and areas that you want to visit on your own, or should you depend on going to a travel agent to have them do it for you?
Again, a great question, Robin. It really depends on the traveler. For somebody like Larry, if you feel like you want to go to Europe for the first time and you're a little bit nervous, a little bit apprehensive, my dad's company, Rick Steve's Europe, puts on these incredible longer trips for 2 or 3 weeks, and you get a full-time hands-on guide that can hold your hand until you don't need it anymore once you touch down in Europe. Because I know it can be intimidating, it can be a little scary, it can be confusing. There's a lot of logistics to keep track of, where to go, what to see, where to sleep, how many days should I spend there, and so on. That's the plus side of a tour or an organized experience, is that you have all that laid out in front of you.
Wow.
Once you feel comfortable, I would highly recommend traveling independently too, because then you can really customize your time, your experience, and your budget to what gets you excited. I do these travel talks all across the country and to a lot of students over in Europe. And I'm all about saying, be selfish. Figure out what gets you excited. Don't feel like you just have to go from museum to museum. For me, I'm really into, for example, I like professional cycling, like Tour de France. So I love to catch a stage of the Tour de France, wherever it might be. And so if I get a chance to see that, I'm among people who share that same interest, that same passion, and that immediately customizes my travel to what gets me most excited. That's something that I really like to do.
I love this book. I love this topic, Andy. And the book is called Andy Steve's Europe. You can find it on Amazon. That's where I found it for the picture that's on the podcast that we're doing right here. Do you know what I really am wanting to do? I want to... And I do this, I grew up in New York and I've lived here, so that's my 2 places. I lived in LA for a little while too, but that's it. And so when I go someplace as a visitor, like I went to Quebec one time, and I like getting the feeling of living there instead of being a tourist, you know what I mean? Like you just go to the deli for a sandwich or you go to the movie theater. I mean, I like the touristy stuff too, don't get me wrong, but so is that... I mean, do you see a lot of people doing that? Like if you had an Airbnb, it's almost like you have a little apartment for a week or something of that sort?
Yeah, and I'm all about that. If you can imagine, there's millions of tourists coming through these cities, and they're all seeing and doing the same thing. So I do spend a chunk of my book talking about how to find Airbnbs or hostels in an interesting neighborhood where you can find cheap markets and really kind of find your own corner of town. And when you do that, when you do the local thing, you save money and you have a more authentic experience. We oftentimes think about Europe in a kind of frozen in time, frozen in history. And what we can't forget is that we're living and creating history on a daily basis. And over in Europe, I really like to dig into the living culture, I call it, and see what's going on in London, for example. Banksy, a street artist, a really famous graffiti artist, has these pieces on a corner that you can just track down, and it's kind of like an urban scavenger hunt. It's so cool, and that's happening on a daily basis over there. So that's something that I'm really passionate about.
Americans are super fascinated with the royal family. Some of them are, at least I am. So since the wedding is coming up this week, should reservations have been made 6 months ago in order to get a good place to stay in London so you can attend the, be on the street so you can wave and stuff like you do?
Wave.
Yeah, there's baby mania going on over there. They just had their royal baby, and of course there's the wedding around the corner. I'm not too plugged into it, but I did just interview a local guide over there in London who was sharing all about it for my podcast. On important events like this, you definitely want to reserve ahead, especially accommodation, because that can really climb in price and drop in availability. But didn't they only announce the wedding like 2 months ago or something like that?
Yeah, it hasn't been too long.
Really late. Yeah, but no, that'll be very interesting to see how it shakes out, because they're marrying a commoner.
Andy, have you had any culture clashes, where you are in a place? There was one thing we were watching, I think it was in Germany, and it was a park, and people were just lying around nude, and I thought, oh my gosh, can you imagine walking in on that, not realizing that's what they do? I mean, did you have any culture clashes like that for yourself?
Yeah, I have a lifetime of them, and usually I wouldn't necessarily say clashes. I like to call them learning experiences. Even in New York City, I think recently I heard about a waiter being fired in New York City, and he was filing for discrimination. He's like, I'm not rude, I'm just French, And a lot of times we Americans interpret, for example, the Parisian way of interacting with people as cold or rude, and they're not being outwardly rude to you. It's just a different way of expressing themselves. Americans are known to be very smiley, very talkative, very relatively loud. If you're in a restaurant filled with people from all over the world, it's the Americans you're going to hear talking most likely. And so I encourage travelers to kind of be a chameleon. Look around you, be observant, use your ears, understand what's going on, and just try to blend in a little bit. And you can, that just a little bit of effort and a little bit of situational awareness goes a long way. So just be observant and emulate it.
Yeah, because when my cousin and his wife come down, they're almost 40. And when they go to different places, they love staying on the beach. So if they're dining on the beach itself, they always ask the other couple, like if there are empty chairs at a stranger's table, they'll ask if they could join them, and more than likely the other people will say yes, and they'll get in the social conversation. So when you're over there, you should just kind of stick to yourself then.
Oh, I won't say that. I'm just saying the service that you'll get at a restaurant in Paris is very different from what you'll see here in the States. For example, if a waiter or waitress brings you a ticket or your bill before you ask for it, that's considered really rude in Europe. But here in the States, it's just efficient, And so, because in Europe, that means that they're trying to get you out of the restaurant. But we would think why? Where are they? I haven't seen them forever. They haven't asked, if we need anything, and it's just different. So, that's what I would.
I can't wait to go.
So I really had heard this before, but I didn't quite get it until I read the book, or at least this part of the book, where John Kennedy said he was a jelly donut.
Yeah.
Ich bin ein Berliner means I am a jelly donut.
Yeah. Because ein Berliner means I am a pastry of Berlin that they call a Berliner rather than ich bin Berliner, right? So I don't speak German. Don't quote me on that. But what I love to do is, of course, there's the information, the logistical information in the guidebook, but I've kind of written up and called out interesting cultural tidbits.
And that's Thank you for mentioning that. That is my favorite part of this book. Since I'm not there and I can't go to the restaurants, I love the little interesting things, and the whole book is filled with them. Have you really gone to all these places, all these restaurants?
Yes, I put in 1 million steps thanks to modern technology and pedometers. I know that I put in 1 million steps updating. I visited close to 1,000 venues.
Wow.
And it was busy for sure, but I love it. And what I've done is I've leaned on my local friends. I have friends in all these cities through running my tour company, so I can lean on them and say, hey, I want to hire you for the week. Let's run around to your favorite spots. These guys live there, whether it's Arthur, my friend Arthur in Amsterdam, or Carson in Barcelona, or Bogey in Budapest. I can say, hey, Bogey, what's hot in Budapest these days? And she's like, well, a pinball museum just opened up. Let's check that out. And we'll go there and spend hours.
Really?
Playing
Wow.
pinball on these machines dating back decades.
Did you know?
So it's so cool to have that insider take.
Did you know pinball was illegal in New York until like the 70s or something? If they had them there, but they were illegal.
Well, it is such a crazy game, no? I didn't know that.
All right.
I didn't know that.
All right.
This is great. I love this.
By the way, I'm going to subscribe to your podcast. I love travel talk, so I'm going to be listening to you on your podcast. So what is it? The podcast is just Andy Steves?
Andy Steves Travel. We're currently working on season 2. Definitely check out season 1. We have 22 episodes going from Wales to Krakow to Rome to Barcelona up to Edinburgh, talking to all these, again, interesting friends and local connections I have to talk about travel, entrepreneurship, and kind of the digital nomad lifestyle that's really kind of been popping up over these recent years.
Okay.
And we love that, the nomad lifestyle, because it's like you want something exciting to happen. You want to stay safe, but you still want to feel like you're a free spirit.
Yeah, and people are finding all sorts of interesting ways to support themselves on the road. I'm living here or visiting here in Seattle, and it is brutally expensive to go for anything from I paid $4 for just an espresso the other day here in Seattle.
Wow.
It's just like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I guess that comes along with being a coffee snob, but that's self-inflicted.
There you go.
But from that to a dinner date, it can easily run up to $100. So it's when you're on the road and living for cheap in cities like Budapest, you can find a way to do it, and so I like to interview people and hear their story. I just last week I interviewed a guy from the East Coast who went down to Peru to train in MMA in mixed martial arts in high altitude for a year, and it's just so cool to get his take. He's in Colombia right now, continuing on, but I get to share those stories on my podcast at Andy Steves Travel.
That's
and
wonderful.
AndySteves.com is the website for Andy. The book is on Amazon and etc. Andy Steves Europe is the name of the book. Thank you, Andy. That was fun. Tell your dad we love his show. We have his show on Saturdays here on WOCA. So
Yeah, we do.
Yeah, we carry the show.
Yeah. Nice. Well, Larry and Robin, thanks so much for having me. Happy travels, and Larry, holler when you're getting over to Europe.
Okay, I will. I'm going to be a podcast listener, so we're going to be friends. At least I'll feel like it. Thank you, Andy. All right, we'll be right back.
Chris Foster. The American embassy in Israel has moved from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. President Trump on video at the dedication ceremony.
Israel is a sovereign nation with the right, like every other sovereign nation, to determine its own capital.
Palestinians, though, claim part of Jerusalem as their capital, and at least 41 have been killed by Israeli troops at a protest on the Gaza border today. The president says he wants to help a Chinese telecommunications company, ZTE, that's